Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good to go.
Two different kids.
You ready?
Yep.
All right, I'd like to call to order the Pittsfield Board of Finance special meeting for March 1st, 2023. Let's start with the pledge of allegiance, please. Pledge of
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, any public comment before we get started? Hearing none, let's open the floor to our first select woman and her budget discussions.
All right, well, good evening, Board of Finance and selectmen. I don't know if everybody wants to come to the table or not, feel free. It is the Board of Selectmen presentation to the Board of Finance for the fiscal year 2023-2024. It's hard to believe another year's gone by, but here we are again. And as required by charter, the Board of Selectmen is to present our budget to you. So I'm here tonight to facilitate that. At the conclusion of this presentation, the budget will be
Steve,
back
Steve, you gotta keep it down.
Sorry.
Please. Thank you, sorry.
in your trusted hands. And I just passed around the letter. I emailed it out not too long ago, but I wasn't sure if everyone had a copy or not. But the budget that you guys come up with, we're sure we are confident as a Board of Selectmen that will be aligned with our goals, which we'll touch upon in a few more slides. Feel free to ask questions along the way. You don't have to feel like you need to hold them all to the end. The individual budget lines obviously will be done throughout your budget workshop schedule over the next 2 weeks. And without further ado, I did want to thank Polini because she filled in for Marcia during the Board of Selectmen deliberations, and she did a great job. So thank you, Polini. All right, these are the things I'd like to touch upon tonight, and they coincide with the letter. We'll look at our goals, the aggregate of the budget, the summary and changes of the budget, our town operating budget with the key drivers and some other details, education operations, our debt, the capital, and Marcia will touch on the revenue. So these are our goals, both overarching for the budget and our financial goals. Oops. We used 6 fundamental goals to develop the town budget, and here they are. To provide quality services to our residents, to provide an excellent education, maintain our capital assets at their maximum, take steps to reduce dependence on debt, build long-term foundation for our strategic plan, and despite a looming recession, high inflation, increasing debt burden, etc., we're going to do our best to try to live within our means. This here is a snapshot of the aggregate of the budget, and it shows the 4 areas in the fractions of the pie. So we have the Board of Ed coming in at 61%, the town at 27%, our debt at 9%, and cash paid for capital at 3%. Do you guys want this open, closed? Either way. No preference. Any questions so far? So this is the budget summary from the Board of Selectmen deliberations. After talking with our stakeholders and deliberating for over 2 weeks, we estimated that the FY 23-24 expenditures to be in the neighborhood of about $82.7 million. And in order to address these expenditures, and after taking into account our estimated non-tax revenue, we're estimating approximately $75.6 million will be required to meet the town demands this year. So these are the changes to the budget compared to last year.
What's the number you're talking about to run the town machine?
I'm sorry?
You said 75 million?
76.
76?
About this side?
Say for the 5, you have to add in the 500 over the tax.
All right, thank you.
So this year's, I have a frog in my throat, I apologize. This year's proposed tax rate of 27.05 is up 1.17 mils over last year, which equates to a 4.52% increase. The next bullet explains the appraised versus the assessed value. And then the bottom line is based on the median house value, a resident could see an increase of about $355 in their taxes, which breaks out to about $30 per month, or in other words, a couple of trips to Dunkin'. Any questions on that? So the focus on the town side is on our critical needs, and these are our must funds. There are obviously listed here some key drivers in the town's operating budget for this year, but I can't underscore enough the importance of funding public safety, health, and welfare, and our ability to provide our town and our residents with the quality service that they deserve. There's a couple things I just wanted to touch on briefly. The health insurance, some good news came in last night. You may have seen the email from Bob earlier for the school side and the adjustments there based on the new health insurance rate. We were estimating in the budget a 10% increase. They had said it would be anywhere this year between 8 and 12, so we came in with estimates of 10%. But it's sounding like there'd be more aligned with a 7.1% increase if that holds true. So that's really good news. I know Bob and Ken had worked on the math. Marcia was working some numbers out last night. I haven't seen those yet.
98,000 for this, the school side, 72,000 for the town side.
I'm sorry?
It's 198,000 for the school side, 72,000 for the town side, rough math.
72 for the town? Okay.
Rough math, napkin math. Probably within a few $100.
Well, 72,000 is better than no thousand. And then for the percent increase there, it shows 1.72%, but it's indicative of the 2.25%. For center school, those are an estimated carrying costs of just keeping the heat on low and turning the lights off and essentially doing nothing with the school.
What's the big makeup of that number?
It's in your, do you have the capital budget book?
I think it was 80,000 for a fence. I'm sort of lost on why 80,000 of it's for a fence when it already has fences to the back and to the front of the properties. So in order to get, you can't get to the back of that school without going through a gate because they kept that for the safety of the children, those gates. So $80,000 for a fence seems odd when you could just put 2 chains across the entrance and the exit. And that's why I'm curious of what drove that number and how did you all agree to that number of 107? Because I think the fuel and the heating is like 30,000 total to cover that. 80,000 of that is a fence. So I'm just curious of the logic,
Yeah.
because this is your must-key drivers. So you've listed 6 items of must-key drivers. So one of those is Center Elementary School. How did you agree to 80,000 to a fence between the Board of Selectmen when we have a fence already there and it might just need to block off the front exit and the exit? Because the school's got to have protection for the children not to be able to get out to the streets. There's already gates on one side of the school and on the other side of the school. So as a key driver I'm sort of confused of why that number stands at 107.
So
that's one of
is
your
your
key
question why a fence was built into it? At the
I'm just
107?
trying to understand, this is one of your key drivers. You listed that this is one of your top key drivers. What is the makeup of that, and how did you as a Board of Selectmen come to that 107 number when 80,000 of it is a fence? In this, I believe 80,000 is a fence in that budget
Yeah.
line item is, if it was a key driver, how did that, you all agree that 80,000 should go to a fence there?
Well,
Or,
the fence was a recommendation by our town engineer, Ralph, when we looked at quote-unquote mothballing the school as an option. And we were trying to come up with the tally of how much it would cost to just carry the school without occupying it. And the fence was brought up by Ralph as a safety concern.
but we already have a fence around 3/4 of the building.
I think he was talking about fencing the entire building off.
The thinking and knowing, that's what I'm saying, this is a key driver. This is a $107,000 driver.
Well, the other thing to consider is that the Board of Selectmen didn't decide, or the town hasn't decided, I should say, that the school will be mothballed, so we built this in as a carrying cost because there is no plan for the next phase or the next use of Center School
So
at this juncture.
what we're saying is the $80,000 fence is absolutely mandatory to the protection of that school. And this is a key driver. You put it as a key driver. That's why I'm asking the question. If it was in the budget somewhere else, this is one of your key bullet points of why we're increasing so high. And I'm trying to understand, from my point of view, of why 80% of that is a fence, when we already have, like I say, fences already to the right side, to the left side. What are we protecting? There's alarm systems in the school, I believe, already, from my understanding, is we are in a tight budget year, we're looking everywhere to cut money, and this is listed again, key driver, is that $80,000 fence necessary? And it wasn't, if it was a key driver, what were the Board of Selectmen discussions around this? And how, how did you decide 107 was a good number? Again, it's not in the budget, it's a key driver. So. Then on your heating oil and fuel as a key driver category increase, what numbers were based on that 55,979? Because I believe in the budget it's 333. You haven't set on a number yet as a fuel cost, and today's price is $3 a gallon from Mitchell as of February 28th. So what's driving that 55,979? Is that a $3.33 a gallon budget number, or is that actual February 28th data, which shows that number at 3.03? Because that number would change based on that, I believe, as well.
It wasn't based on the yesterday or 2 days ago budget, or the
So it's based on the
estimate that came from
$3.33 a
yesterday.
gallon, but today's price is $3.03, which was February's 28th number.
Do we have a month in yet?
No. Okay. Thank you.
So as far as the fence goes, I don't have an answer. Do either of you gentlemen want to chime in on the fence situation?
Yeah, Terry?
Okay, my understanding is, I don't believe that we need a fence either. If anything, if we were gonna repurpose that school for park and rec or something, not the school, but a portion of it, the fence could be painted as far as I'm concerned. I thought that that's $107,000 was there also to do repairs, any repairs that we would need to do if we were going to repurpose that temporarily with Park and Rec. And so that was my understanding, and what the money that we didn't use would not be used.
So based on that logic, where's the money then built into the budget for the repurposing of the school or the repairs of the
So
school?
that's not a mothballing.
No.
So I'm just trying to understand.
No.
Because again, this is a key driver. This is not like buried in the budget. This is one of the key drivers that's listed here, and we're just trying to understand your key drivers.
Okay.
What's driving a 7.35% increase, and that's one of your key drivers. I'm just trying to understand the logic behind it, so we can get on board with it.
I mean, there is no program for repurposing for park and recreation. My thought was, let's think about doing that so we can generate a revenue through that. And if there were, obviously it would have to come to a vote whether anything we do. So that was my understanding of the 107,000, anything that wasn't used, or if we're not gonna do that,
So-
then no.
So now I don't know if it's a mothballing expense or if it's a.
Well, we don't have a plan right now.
No, there is
The Board
no
of
plan, yeah.
Selectmen, through our deliberations, discussed reestablishing a committee to move this forward. And it's not gonna be done by the time the kids vacate the school in August. So we need a plan moving forward. We may have to take a pause on the building, and you can't just walk away from it. You have to, we will incur some costs associated with
Absolutely.
the
Yes,
building no matter what we
absolutely.
do. So this is a placeholder for now, but, and it might sit for a year, I don't know.
But the
Right.
problem is, what's the placeholder holding?
All right, well,
Again,
And that's
the-
listed in the budget book.
Right,
I'm
of which
looking for that.
9,000 of it is heating and fuel, 10,000 of it's electricity. There's only 20,000 in actual cost besides the fence, I believe.
Well, then, we don't need a fence. When Ralph's here with Public Works, we can ask him, or you can ask him what his
Okay.
logic was on that. I'm not a safety expert, all I know is that it was a recommended feature. You know, if the building is gonna sit, it would potentially keep people away from it, I don't know. Nothing's a hard fast that we absolutely need a fence, but, or as much fence.
I'm just trying to understand the
But
number.
fencing is very expensive, as we
I
learned at
agree,
the new school.
and that's an ongoing cost. That 80,000 is only a one-year cost. That's now ongoing, it's a rental. So you would be, not only would you be 80,000, you got a knock-on of annual costs of that if we continue it. So that's why, again, I'm trying to understand the key driver here of, that's 80% of that number, is trying to understand what's making.
Of
That's all.
all the options, from what I've learned so far, keeping it lights off, et cetera, is the cheapest of all options. Because to put
Yes.
people in there, we have change of use
Absolutely.
considerations
We're
and
not in
everything else.
disagreement at all on that.
But I think we don't normally fund things unless we have a reason for, the 170,000 has to come from something. We don't just put placeholder amounts in the budget. If we need to do that, we put it in a contingency.
Well, they did list it as a fence, so I mean,
Where?
it's in, I've seen it, so that's
Yeah,
why I
it's
got
in-
the number.
it's in here
So
towards the back.
I can't, somewhere it's here, I saw it, so that's why I brought it up, but I read
I
it.
think it was in there for safety, but it's your view.
All right,
Sounds like-
let's continue on.
So where,
Oh,
in the-
right here, it's under the CES part of what we got for the budget book, county utilities update. Right?
Yeah, it should be the last page.
Note, cost per fence for CLS was 80,000 for the installation and multiple years of rental. So it's, now says it's 80,000 for installation and multiple years of rental, but we've included it in the 1-year budget. I'm trying to understand it, and again, it's a key driver to your budget, or your recommendation. This isn't like something that we just honed in on and said, wow, look at this, this was your key drivers. The explanation is, note, the cost for the fence at CLS was 80,000 for the installation and multiple years of rental.
I'm sorry, where do you see that, Glenn?
On the
Oh, yes, I got you,
4340
I got you.
2023 budget workshop, town utilities with Aquarian update, under the CES tab.
Yeah.
That's your 107,499 number on that tab. It is line 37.
Yeah, when Marcia and Ken were working through this, because the last estimate we had was from when the ad hoc committee was established. And that's, at the back of this tab here, if everyone has the budget book, the last page of the utilities tab, it spelled out what the difference was. The carrying cost would have been $30,000 approximately 5 years ago, I believe.
I mean, they're saying for water, it's 3,000. For the fuel, it's 9,000. For the electric, it's, to carry it for a year is 5,000. Sewer, they don't really know yet, they discussed that, but the biggest driver of that 107 number is the fence. And if it's needed, it's needed. I mean, I don't understand it personally, but I mean, if it's needed, it's needed, but
Yeah.
we need to understand why it's needed when 3/4 of the building is already fenced off. All it is the front of the building that we're talking about, and that has an entrance and an exit.
Yeah, I don't know, other buildings, I don't know if Brookfield's ever abandoned a building essentially, or vacated a building and boarded it up. I don't know what the protocol is for doing that, but that's a really good question because we could potentially have a large savings there. I don't know what the requirements are of
There may be requirements, don't miss,
mothballing.
there may be, but it doesn't seem like we already have, like I say, 3/4 of it already fenced off. So, all right, please.
Which line are the new school safety officers on, the change positions or the increases in public safety?
The one with the asterisk, you'll see that next.
Okay.
The increases in public safety accounts for all other contractual increases and certain mandates that are absolute must funds, and there was a $134,000 request in EMS funding, things of that nature. So next slide shows the salaries for the changed positions and the hours. And I can speak to these positions, but I can say that by not backfilling them, for the positions that have lapsed previously, there's created just a gap, a tremendous gap in customer service and work productivity. So for example, in years past, there was an assistant IT. There was always extra help in the building office. And we had a a full-time sanitarian at a salary that we've been unable to hire at because there's a need for those skills across the state, and the competitive rate is much higher than what we're advertising. Also with the registrars, the state of Connecticut is coming out with a 14-day advanced voting program. So they haven't said definitively what that time frame is. It could be a full 14 days, it could be half that, it could be 10 days. So this is estimated at 10 days, but I think I heard last week that it's looking like it might be the full 14. So we may need more money there.
So it costs us $2,000 a day to do that? How many people does it make up? How many hours is it? What's the basis of the
Yeah.
22,000? I mean, if it's 10 days and you're talking 14 days is 28,000 on a $2,000 a day burn rate.
So that's all spelled out in your next priority forms and the back of the budget book, but is Mel on your calendar for your deliberations? Do you have the registrar coming or no?
No, that's all right. I'll go through it.
Any specific questions you have about that? But he did a pretty good job on his next priority forms of like laying it all out.
I guess I'll go back to the last page of key drivers, and this is another key driver is we're over, seeing this and we're sort of high level viewing it. In order for you guys, again, as a board of selectmen, to put this through, what's driving these numbers? They're your key statistics. These are your key, you labeled these as your top 5 things to understand and to push forward to the taxpayers. And we can't get an answer on what's driving that number other than look it up, or if it was, that's a number that, gee, it's something out of the ordinary. The registrar has a very limited budget. For them to ask for $22,000 more is a pretty serious increase on their budget, I would assume.
Yeah.
So when we pass these things, what's driving that? I understand the state, you got me, you said the state drove it. So you didn't say, as a first selectwoman, we're just gonna do this. There was a statement, there was a statute behind your action, but what drove that number to get to a higher percentage? That's all. All right. Next slide, I guess, please.
So just to be clear on that slide though, the request for IT help is for a part-timer, not a full-time, which the town had in the past. Okay, any other
You
questions?
did,
there?
yeah, I did have one more. You said there's a gap in productivity and a gap in, what's your measurable? You made a statement earlier, that there's been a gap in
Yes.
productivity and a gap in something. What's the measurable?
So for example, the land use department writ large, which includes, well, I've broken it back out, but across the fire marshal's office, the health department, land use, the building department, there's been a lot of turnover within the last year. We have a new director. We've had one retire. We've had a new employee, and then most recently, Ginny's replacement is now leaving, and I've taken somebody from land use to come back with Ginny. So we've had vacancies, and on the other side of the other side of the room, we've had the building department inundated and overwhelmed with permits and processing and the backlog.
Okay.
Whereas in the past, they've had sporadic part-time help with a couple of folks I won't name by name, but
I don't know. But when you bring up the building department now, their revenues went from 500,000 3 years ago to 300,000 now. So their revenues on permits has gone down almost 40%. So now we're saying there's a gap in productivity, but we don't know how to measure it. You can't say we're missing out on 47% productivity ratios. It's immeasurable when you say a gap in productivity. I should be able to say we're at this point, now we're at this point. And the second point is, if the building permit sales or revenue has gone down by 40%, what's driving the need for more workers in that department? Because by definition, if that number went from 300 to 500,000, you can make the argument that, gee, we're bringing in 500,000 now in building permits, and we only had 3 people, now we need 4. We've gone from 580,000, I think, a few years ago, now down to 310 in your current budget.
so I understand your point, but I don't think that decreased revenue is the only factor indicative of productivity. That what I was going to tell you, separate from the building department and just the backlog there, is that we now have a full-time director of health. And without the full-time sanitarian, it's created all this extra work for the new director, especially coming out of COVID and trying to address things that we haven't been able to get after in the past, with Doc only being part-time. We have an admin assistant who works part-time for the fire marshal and part-time for the health department. So, for example, with the new replacement for the executive assistant to the first selectman's office, the blight panel is without an admin assistant. So I wanted to give it to health. I thought it was better aligned, but that admin assistant can't accommodate it. So there's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot of customers that come in, there's a lot of phone calls, and all of these things take time. It's just that they went from having a seasoned person as a director level in that office to having a new person with gaps in coverage and employees leaving. So there's kind of a lot of moving parts there, and I understand your point on the revenue, but it's not the only,
Understood.
it's not
On
the
the
only thing happening.
sanitarian right now, and the whole, you brought up you need a sanitarian, and you're saying you can't find anything. Last year, you made a decision not to go with the health district, to go with the sanitarian and to go with the thing, and that cost was weighing out to be like similar to the health district. Now it seems like it's tipping the scale to the health district would be a cheaper option for the town instead of bringing this infrastructure in, bringing in these overheads, struggling to find the overheads.
the pressure it's put on all your departments, as you just outlined,
The
right
health
now.
departments, as we learned last summer through that whole debate and doing the research on whether or not we could district, the only viable option is the Newtown Health District, and they're not ready to accommodate us. These districts are new, and the Housatonic Region Health District is a prime example of how they may have grown too big too fast, and they're having a hard time filling their ranks as well. So at the time, the decision was to go with our full-time director of health for a lot of reasons, but primarily, probably the biggest factor was that Newtown could not accommodate.
And then we checked with them this year,
And that was 6 months ago, and now I haven't checked back.
because it seems now like this is going the reverse way of,
Well, the sanitarian situation is not unique to Brookfield. It's
Absolutely.
It's a skill set that there's a shortage of across the state, and these people are being poached by whichever town can pay more at the time.
absolutely.
So,
Again, that's why, is this a strain on your resources for the sanitarian, or is this something that would fall under the health district and it would alleviate a lot of pressure all over for less cost?
we as a board made the decision to keep it, the director of health in-house.
Okay.
And I think it was a smart decision based on the climate with COVID and everything else, a backlog. And, I mean, we could have a public health and safety crisis on our hands, which you'll find out when the director comes to talk to you, because what are they called? Not investigations, but the inspections, thank you. You know, and all of our facilities and restaurants across town are just,
The health
they're
inspector.
behind, they're lagging.
Okay. Thank you.
BOE. So this year, their budget increased by 1.7 million over last year. They experienced similar drivers that the town did with the increases. Their request was for 50,802,000, and the Board of Selectmen recommended a $400,000 cut, bringing it to 50,400. Excuse me, 50,400,000. But interestingly, in 3 years, the Board of Ed budget increased 8.7 million, which doesn't include the 1.7 million request for this proposed budget.
Can you go back? That number's not right. Let's go back to your original budget in prior years. Maybe I'm wrong. Keep going, keep going. All right, down one. So now, the school budget in 2019-2020 was 43 million. The current proposed budget is 50 million. That's over a 5-year span, and I can only do my quick math is 7 million. So I don't know where you got 3 years, 8 million, when I could do quick math of 40, maybe I'm reading it wrong, 43 million under 2019-2020, and 50 million underneath the 2023, that's $7 million, 43 to 50, unless I'm seeing it wrong. And I could be wrong.
The budget is showing me it's talking about the budget in 2020.
But the number is not 8 million, it's 7 million over, and the town side has gone up 4 million. So the town side, doing quick math over that 5-year period, the town side has gone up 25% since 2019-2020. And the school side, doing quick math, has gone up 15% over that same time period. If you take all those actual numbers and you do it, and in fact, the town side has gone up 3 million of the $4 million in this last 2 budget seasons, this year and our proposed year. 3 million of the $4 million increase is last year and this year, the last 2 budget years. The 3 prior years is only $1 million increase, 17, 7, 8 to 19, 1. I mean, that's just raw math. Maybe I'm missing something again, but the raw math tells me 17 to 22 is 25%, 43 to 50 is 15% increase over those 5 years. Being the last 2 years going from 1920 to 21-22 on the town side is 17.7 to 19.1, 1.4 million. Then from 21-22 to the current budget is $3 million rough math, napkin math.
7 million, sorry.
But yet, and where in your presentation did it say how much the town side went up? You just pointed out the school side. What was the purpose of just showing the school increase over that period versus not showing the towns? I mean, what was the point of saying that the school went up 8.8 million when it really went up 7 million? What was the driving behind that statement to show us? What were you trying to show us?
Just to show the amount over a short, the dollar amount over a short amount of time that has been given to the Board of Ed.
But the town went up 25%, the school only went up 15%
So
over that same period
The
of 5
napkin
years.
math on the town for the dollar amount is what?
17 million to 22, $4 million bucks, 25%, 24.9 probably, if you want to probably do the math in a proper way. Maybe I'm wrong, I could be wrong.
I'm just, I'm curious to know what the return on the investment is and if that's ever been examined.
In other words, this is where I'm sort of lost, is you chose to choose the Board of Ed number increase of $8 million, and yet I don't understand what the purpose was to show us, because we've been intimate with these budgets since that time, and the percentage is less than the town percentage increase over the same time. And in fact, the percentage of the town in the last two budgets is 75% of the town side of the increase. So I don't understand what we were trying to show with the 8 million, and I really don't understand the number of reducing the town, or the school side by $400,000, what was the, or 500,000, what was the driving point behind that? What was the thought process behind, and then the reverse of that is, what was the thought process of the 100,000 getting put back in by the Board of Ed? I don't know, like, generally as a group, when we move numbers, we talk about it, and we say we're gonna move 79,530 because this, we're gonna move to here, we're gonna take, I don't understand the statement of the 8 million, which doesn't track back math-wise to me. That's a bad number.
Correct.
And
That's
this
right.
is something that was put out to the public, and I'm saying it's not necessarily the right number, because it's simple math. And then I'm saying, you're trying to show that the school has gone up a very high percentage over the past so many years, and yet the town has gone up a higher percentage. And in fact, the biggest drivers of the town percentage are the last 2 years, 3 million of the $4 million. The town has gone up $4.4 million over the past 5 years, and in this budget and last budget, 3 million of that is this year's and last year's budget. So 75% of the increases have come in the last 2 years. So I'm trying to understand what was the purpose of putting that school number in there to show us that $8 million when the town has gone up more, but it wasn't highlighted on the town side.
It's 7 million, so, again, that's bad math. And the additional 1.7, so nearly 9 million over a 4-year period. It was just to be demonstrative of the dollar amount that has been spent over a 4-year period for the Board of Ed's increase.
So on the town side, it's 3 million over the past 2, which is almost,
And part of that is, does that include this year?
yeah, this is this year's numbers.
Next year, I mean.
Yeah, but
So
I guess showing
Part
one
of that
side
is
of
for
it,
the school with the SROs.
but that was also a Board of Selectmen decision to
No,
be made.
that was a
It-
task
no.
force decision, and the town voted on it.
Okay, I will agree to disagree. I think that was driven by the Board of Selectmen.
And my recommendation, I don't know about Harry and Steve, was for ASSOs in every school. It went to the task force. The task force came up with their recommendation, it went to town vote, and the town voted for it.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on that part of it, Team, before we go on to the debt service part of this?
I have a question.
Hello.
Sorry, that was like, and it's just, I just wanted to ask you because it's something that you said. You had said, when you guys were going back and forth about the numbers, you had said something about the return on investment for like over the last phrase. What does that exactly mean?
Like, how do we measure what the town is, what the taxpayers are getting for that.
So for, like, in the sense of the BOE, which you brought up, where's our return of investment? Like, I guess how would you quantify a return of investment on education?
Right.
That's my question to you. Do you, because I honestly, it was something that you said, and I was like, well, that's interesting, and then I was trying to figure out how do you quantify that or base that? Like, I mean, it's kids, there's special ed, there's COVID, I'm just not sure, is there like a driver or a I don't know. I'm asking, I didn't know if there was something that you knew that caused, you know, your thought process on that.
I'm wondering the same things. How do you quantify, or how do you measure success? You know, is 9 million enough? Should it be 20? Should it be 2? I don't know.
Okay.
Are you asking that same question on the town side?
It definitely goes from the town side.
Yeah, in fact, while Brianna was talking about it, I was thinking about Glenn's previous point about how do you measure productivity and all of those things, so. I don't know if the analysis has ever been done, it certainly hasn't in the past 13 months.
In fairness to you, I'm not so sure it's ever been done, so that's in fairness to you, just to say that, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, they do a fantastic job, their budget is really well done, they know what they're doing, they're the educators, Dr. Brill's the superintendent, like,
But that's our
That's-
question to you, and I think it's a fair question, and it is, we go through the Board of Ed budget, they present to us, they provide us with 30 pages of questions, answers. We have gone through it, and what drove the $500,000 cut? And then on the reverse side of that, what drove the $100,000 putback? I just, this is your recommendation to us, and none of us, I don't think, can understand where the 500, because it's not even a percentage, it's not like 1% or 0.5%, or, you know, there's a program out there that, you know, you can't tell the Board of Ed what to do, but you can see how we can make some efficiencies. We're gonna combine IT, we're gonna combine finance, we're gonna do this, it's gonna have a savings of $437,000 and whatever. The number was thrown out at 500,000. And then between the Board of Selectmen, you deliberated, which we don't see because it's done. It's open to the public, it's not hidden. I don't want anybody to think you did hidden things, so let's be clear. But you put 100,000 back in, and I'm just trying to understand the thought processes behind both those numbers.
that was actually Steve's recommendation, and I thought we had very healthy discourse over the 2-week period that we were together. There were a lot of things that we agreed on collectively, there were a lot of things that they agreed on, I disagreed with. There was just very healthy debate, and that was an idea to give them back what they potentially might need.
But what was the?
But when I came up with the first select woman's
Yes.
initial cuts, I was looking for some relief, because we started with that an over 8% budget, and we needed to bring it down. And quite frankly, I'm still not happy with where it is, but I mean, I've spent countless hours personally looking at this budget line by line, and I just have been over it ad nauseum and could not find anywhere else to cut.
So you just cut the schools.
Could go to fence.
Yeah, where's the relief on the town side, though? I mean, that's 7.35%. I guess that would be the question. Was there?
So as we went over a couple slides back, those were all the must funds, and those are the things that are not nice to haves, but are must pays. And I can't speak directly to what the Board of Ed should cut, but I think you all received an email from a resident today about a special ed situation where it appears that there's $150,000
No,
not
that's
committed
not how
in the
we.
budget,
No,
so.
that's not how we work with them. So I respect the person who wrote in, but that's what we've done with this contingency, is we've set the special ed number at a certain point, we've taken the risk on our side. So 1 or 2 students isn't swaying that budget. They already have a set number in there that they deal with. So that, is a different, it's not apples to oranges or oranges to apples.
And that's discussed at a monthly basis in
But-
the Board of Ed Finance Committee. So we talk about number of students that we don't know, if their situation is potentially changing, they put in a placeholder value. if they know what the situation is, that number is worked with, but it's not, you know, I think that it's good knowledge to have from the message that we got, but there is a process that's already in place to determine those special education
You
numbers.
also don't
So,
know
hold on, let's
that
go
is.
back here, go
Yeah.
back to your slide of
in terms
must-haves.
of the limit,
please.
so, yeah.
Well, it's the town budget.
Right, but your drivers and your must-haves, right? I mean, this is, go up one more, please. Oh, that was it, I apologize. So this is sort of the same slide that the Board of Ed shows us, right? I mean, it's very similar, I
Yeah.
think. So, right now, you're showing us this, but the Board of Ed showed you that same format with their must-haves, and you cut 500,000 out of it. I think Ryan's question is, where on your must-haves now does that same percentage come out of? Because the Board of Ed presented us this same slide, different numbers, but different drivers, with a number, and you said, you know what, out of that $2 million ask, I'm cutting 500,000. But yet Ryan asked the question, I believe, if I correct your question, is you're asking for 1.52 on the same basis, 75%. Where's your 300,000 coming out? Where is your 300,000 gonna come out of there? Because you took 500,000 out of a $2.1 million increase. Percentage-wise, where is your 300,000 coming out of that? I think that was Ryan's question. Because that's what you did to the Board of Ed, essentially. I know you're trying to get the budget down, but essentially you took their key drivers, their key needs, and said, you're gonna lose 25% of that.
I mean, I don't know where they would take it from. It's not necessarily having to come from their key
So-
drivers. They could find it
So
elsewhere.
Ryan's
Same on the
asking
town.
you, where's
Same on
your
the town.
25% on that number? Out of that 1.5, where is your 25%?
And it might not be these drivers, it might be another line item.
I mean,
you
there
know.
are, in the all other costs, there's a lot of things that I took out, and you can go back and look,
But
of
they
my
did too.
budget,
They did
and then
too.
we as a
But
board
yeah,
put
we got-
them back in.
But they did the same thing from the superintendent's budget to the Board of Ed budget. They went from 7 or 6, high 6s down to 4.2. So they already drove that number from the department requirements. They drove that number down 3% already. And then you looked at their key drivers and you said, we're gonna take 25% more from you. I think it's roughly 25. I mean, I could be off a little. I think it goes up 2 point something. And so Ryan's question to you is, you've now presented us with, you've taken your department, which is the superintendent budget.
We, not me. We, this is a Board of Selectmen's budget.
Okay, then I'm good with all of that. I mean, I just want answers of, Ryan said, where's your 25% of that, which is $300,000? Where is that? Or, yeah, 350 or whatever. Where is that coming out of? So when we say to you, the same decrease that you put on the Board of Ed, we say to your drivers, where's your 350,000 coming from? It's the same logic, it's straight logic. It's not any curveballs, it's not any,
Well, who's to say that if they have to cut, the town has to cut?
Well, so,
that's the question we're asking you. What's driving that? What's driving your, that's the exact question we're
that's,
asking
what-
you.
that's our job. And the Board of Ed provided us with pages and pages of the questions and answers that answered 90% of questions we might have, and we brought up a couple questions and they answered them. So we don't have that level of deliberation detail, so we're asking questions and not getting answers because they're either not known or whatever. So that's the source of the question. The Board of Ed provided us with the answers in writing, so we don't have to ask these questions.
The Board of Ed has a finance committee that comes up with that, and they do a tremendous job.
Yeah.
The town side
So that's what we're-
doesn't have that committee. The Board of Finance essentially is that committee
That's
for
what we're
the
doing,
town.
and that's what we're doing.
Right.
I guess just, we know this is a tough budget year, and when I see education operations 3.57, I see town at 7.35, what's driving, because
Well, they have a
everybody has
much
similar
larger
costs.
piece of the pie. They're at 61%.
Understood that.
And our budget is much, much smaller, so of course the percentage increase is gonna look larger.
Well,
It's only
that's
a
not
two-
necessarily
No,
true.
that's not
No,
how
that's not
percentages
how
work.
percentages
That's
work.
the-
It's a $200,000,
I mean, if there's fixed costs, yes, then
It's a
it happens.
$200,000 difference,
What percentage are they of the budget?
61%.
I don't know how they're 61%. Can we do that math? Again, let's do that
It's a-
math.
The The Board of Finance is asking, I'm sorry, the Board of Education is asking for $214,000.
No, I wanna know the budget makeup of, what's the, it's right here, isn't it? 61%? Yeah, thank you.
With the debt service
Yeah,
account.
yep, understood. All right, that's right, okay. But I think that's the question Ryan's asking is, where is the 350? If we were to task you the same way you tasked the Board of Ed, I recommended the Board of Ed, the task would be take 350,000 out of those numbers. Because that's essentially what you put on the Board of Ed. Essentially, I mean, it is what you put on the Board of Ed. You took their key drivers of 2.1, where they said, these are needs. You're doing the same thing, saying, Board of Finance, these are my needs. We've gone through the departments, these are my needs. And that's the number I want, but yet I took away 25% of the Board of Ed's needs.
Oh, well, are they needs or,
Well, then I'll ask you, are these
Wants?
needs? Because the fence
Yes,
is that
they
a
are.
need? Is 80,000 of the fence a need?
the,
Is 55,979 a need
asterisk-
on the fuel, when the fuel prices have gone
where the
down?
asterisk is absolutely, so this slide.
Absolutely needed, or are they niceties? Because we're running the town right now. We're running the town right now. Based on, I don't see the town falling down without any of those.
Well, I would suggest you wait to hear from the department heads on how they're running the departments.
And we can say the same again for the Board of Ed. So where do we stand? If we give you all of your needs, and you think all of your needs are needed, and we go, and we talk to the Board of Ed, and Bob Belden comes here and says, Glenn, absolutely, these are all of my needs. We're sitting at 5.5%, 6% increase. I'm trying to, the logic here isn't holding water.
But
Your
the-
needs can't be ultimate needs, and the Board of Ed needs have to be, something has to be.
Well, every time they have needs, it's like, they say jump and we say how high. They just had an over $700,000 overrun. So.
The-
What did you have an overrun on? Now you got me now. So let's talk health benefits. They had a health benefit overrun that we had to pay. You know, we agreed to pay that. What was the town liability on that side? Do you know what the town liability was on that side? So, what overrun did you have? You wanna know why you didn't have an overrun? Can you explain to me why you didn't have an overrun?
Why don't
Because you had a
explain
change in status of your employees that actually covered your overrun, because you went from family coverage down to single coverage. So you lucked out, nothing was managed. The numbers worked in your favor to cover that variance. Not because there was a manager, not because you absolutely managed those numbers, because you had employees change their status. Otherwise, you'd be looking at the same overrun.
it? Yeah, my family was one of them.
Okay, but you'd be looking at the same overrun. So to throw that on the school, on a thing that the state mandated, the state said the number's gonna be 8% or whatever the number was, that's what we based the budget on. They came back with a letter to us stating that number, and then they increased it after the budget went through. So their overrun was that. Fuel is the same thing. Who's covering your fuel overruns? Who's covering your fuel overruns on the town side? You know what, the Board of Finance is working the numbers to cover them, just like we're doing the Board of Ed. So for you to say, they overran $700,000, they don't have the revenue stream you have. They don't have the extra interest coming in on the money that's in the bank. So that is part of the agreements we made. So to say that they overran $700,000 is a load of malarkey. That's a load of malarkey to throw it out there. And I think it's disrespectful to the Board of Ed to say they overran it, because this was in full agreement from day one on both sides. We said, if the town has an overrun in health insurance, we're gonna cover it out of the contingencies and extra revenue. If the school side had and the same thing with fuel. If we said no to your transfers on things of fuel, you wouldn't cover your fuel costs either. So I don't, to throw that out there, the $700,000 overrun to me is not fair or respectful to the Board of Ed when this was not an overrun.
Well,
This
it
was
came
a
to the Board
plan.
of Selectmen's attention during our deliberations, so
And whose fault is that when we've been discussing this every month?
it never came through to the Board of Selectmen.
It came to you
formal
every month.
channels.
We talk about this every month. We sit in this room every single month, Tara.
And
We
I'm
sit
the
in this
messenger
room.
back to the Board of Selectmen. How come the Board of Ed didn't come to the Board of Selectmen and
Is that
present it?
really your answer?
Well,
Is that a real? No, I need to know, because is that really your answer? That you sit in here with us as a group
Was
And
I
you-
here when Bob presented it?
Every month he
Every
presents
month.
it.
Board of Education is aligned, Board of Education.
Every
Finance.
month Bob comes in here and
To be
says,
fair, he wasn't here last month because he.
but okay, but how many
Terry-
months?
Terry-
And we got an email, we also got an email
She
today
wasn't
about
here
it.
either.
There was
He
an email
sends us
today.
his email every month outlining this in a
We
cover
got it
letter.
today.
So
Correct.
you're saying that,
So it's my role to relay it back to the Board of Selectmen?
Yes, actually, yes.
Well, why, how does the Board of Finance come to you without not coming to the Board of Selectmen? For
Everything that I
additional
sit on
requests
the
for
meeting,
money?
I convey back to the team. So if I sit on something, I have phone calls with everybody. I talk to my team on a weekly basis on one-on-ones just to catch up with everybody, to see how things are, and to discuss issues that have came up or changes. Like, they already knew today that the health insurance went down because I picked up the phone and I called Dan in the morning, I talked to Ryan in the morning, I talked to Mary, I talked to Eileen, and I talked to Brianna about, hey, this letter just came out, there was an email out, just letting you know that the 7.1, it went down to 7.1. So they already knew this was in the works before we got to the meeting and heard your good news, because we share the information as a team, we look
Good
at things,
job.
we pass it on.
That's great.
So to say that the Board of Selectmen didn't know when you sat in every meeting, this is something that $700,000, we've talked about the contingency of the 380, we've talked about the extra revenue, Bob Belden's even talked about the extra revenue in his Board of Ed meetings about how we're gonna cover it. So this is not something new, and I'm sort of like flabbergasted right now of,
I mean, feel free to chime in here, Ian and Steve.
well, if you're chiming in, then I gotta be honest with you, I'm gonna say it to y'all, y'all ain't doing your job. I gotta say it in public.
The problem we have here is Harry and I are not part of this meeting, right? You can invite us in, and that's fine. If the Board of Finance wants Harry or I to speak, they can invite us in to speak. Otherwise, we can't talk.
And Steve, come to the table and speak, please.
So Harry and I found out about the $725,000 last Thursday, right? And the request was made of John Burrell to come in, and he came into our meeting, our deliberations, with Bob Belden and Ken Post. And Bob was not happy. He was upset, and I don't blame him. He said, we've been having this discussion about $725,000 for the last 5 months. I was unaware of that. That was not told to me. So then I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wait a minute. We have the extra income from interest. We have the FEMA money. We have about $2.5 million in found money that's coming in that we can allocate. Primarily, most of that's going towards capital. One-time revenue, one-time expense. Okay, that makes sense to me. In the budget we were given, there was no allowance to pay for this $725,000.
It's coming under this year's revenue.
It wasn't there, so we had to adjust the budget to make sure that we had money to pay for that $725,000.
All right, let's please finish.
We're on the debt. So in the 22-23 budget, we were just dipping our toes and testing the water of managing the debt bubble, but now we have jumped in with both feet, I'd say, going into 23-24. And as you all have said many times along the way, that the debt bubble was inevitable, you anticipated it, and you planned appropriately for it, so we just have to continue to proactively manage it.
On this, I'd like to change our agenda for Tuesday night and change the location of our meeting. And that's what I'd like to discuss here is, I think what we have done is we have built a model, actually we is not a good statement, Ryan has built a model that shows our debt over the next 20 years. It shows with the debt policy. Now, most towns use a debt policy of 3% to general fund, or 3% to, grand list evaluation. That's a Standard & Poor's measurement too. 0 to 3% is a good value or a good rated company or a good rated town, municipality. 3 to 6% is medium risk. Anything over 6% is a high risk town. Right now, we're running above 3% from debt to our grand list. Also, the towns, all the area towns use 8 to 10% of debt to budget ratio. So we are absolutely running over 10% right now in the debt to budget ratio. So we have stretched our maxes on debt, long-term debt to this debt bubble. But Ryan has built a model where we can lay in projects with the year and the amount of dollars, and it shows where it fit into our budget going forward, how to plan going forward for future debt, how to make it work, how to fit projects in, what's the maximum we can use on a project to make it work to fit underneath the thing. So Tuesday, I would like to change our agenda and get all the shareholders, if we could get the high school, and get the police department representatives there, the fire department,
Library.
the library, the schools, and
So right
the
now.
park and rec, any shareholder that wants capital to show them, and this is actually to help you, Tara, believe it or not, is that we're not just saying no to certain things, we're saying, here's our constraints as a town, how do we manage this together?
That's fantastic.
So I would like to, if everybody approves it here, is change the agenda, and I would like to educate the taxpayers to the point of, these are the constraints financially on us to maintain good financial stability, and they'll be open to, suggestions. This is just a guidelines from what Dan has done research, and Dan, go ahead, if I'm speaking out of school.
You're doing great.
Is these are what other towns use as debt policy. Now, we also found out, we talked about a debt policy, Brookfield has a debt policy in place. Well, it was signed by Bill Tinsley, but it was never signed by anybody else, so we don't know if it was enacted or not. But it also says if we go over 10% of debt to budget ratio, we have to get a waiver signed by the Board of Selectmen, and we're over 10% right now, I believe the model shows. So we're not crazy over 10%, and Ryan's model will show that. But I think if we got all the shareholders together and explain this to the shareholders, the town departments, they could maybe look at their needs a little differently,
Yeah.
prioritize their needs a little differently, and that we can educate the town as well as getting educated by the shareholders. Because Ryan's built it where you can put in, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can put in police station, then you can put in $20 million, you can put in, I want to start it in year 2028, and it populates the fields and shows you where you go out of the cap lines and where you don't, where you stay within. And then you can put in a library if they wanted to start in 2029, whatever million, 15 million of their costs, and we can see that the bucket doesn't hold all the water.
We also have growth on the grand list, growth on, that type of stuff, so you can mess around with that. Keep the grand list the same.
Normally.
Right, so I'd like to move that to the high school. They could still go, because they could still come, because our presentation won't be that
All
long.
right, so I'll start it with the
But we would like-
presentation.
Tara, you to invite all the shareholders of large capital. That would be police, fire, Andy's looking for a new building as well. So I think this would alleviate some of your time and some of our time if we explain this once
Are
to
you-
all the parties.
So you're gonna do that at your regular meeting?
No, Tuesday, we have a special meeting Tuesday. We had it scheduled here
Okay.
with what departments do we have scheduled?
Land use, public works, and park and rec.
So we already had land use, public use, and public works.
Public works and park and rec.
So we're gonna move that to the high school.
We gotta find out.
We gotta find out if we can move it to the high school.
Okay, Diane will do that, perfect.
And then, Tara, we want to explain to all your department heads that are asking for large capitals and new buildings and everything else of, this is the constraints. We'll do it once, so you don't have to look at it more than once and explain that this crosses the boundaries, and how do we fix it, or how do we work together as a town to meet the needs? Because one of your goals, I think, was to meet everybody's needs.
Well, that's nearly impossible.
Yes.
I'm just saying, one of the goals was, and this is to say, hey, we hear your needs. We actually listen to your needs, but this is the constraints. These are the constraints of good fiscal, responsible running towns, municipalities. So we would like to do that Tuesday.
So are you gonna rearrange, bring the library up from the 15th to the 7th?
No, they're just gonna come for this capital presentation. And all we need is one person, we don't need the whole library. One representative.
Like Parks and Recs is a big part of what you just said.
Parks and
If-
Recs is already scheduled for that night, so we're just gonna move Parks and Recs from here to the high school. Public Works is also a big thing, they're scheduled for Tuesday, we're
Yeah.
gonna move them from here to the high school.
Okay, so have them, the same departments still come,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right,
even if
100%.
they don't have a major capital
Yeah.
project.
Same departments
but
that
they're
were on
gonna
the
have
list
major
anyway.
capital needs down the road. Park and Rec is gonna have a need down the road.
Right.
Public Works is gonna have a capital need down the road.
And if you haven't noticed, we cut 100,000 from paving for this year, which we'll talk about.
I've gone through the numbers, we can take care of that.
Okay,
And we're still gonna come out under 4%, under 4%.
awesome.
Capital presentation department heads, we'll start with that.
Yes.
And then move to the budget workshop with land use, public works, parks and rec, and then, there we go. Diane, just let me know if you can get the room.
Yeah. I
Perfect.
just think, and Harry, we're gonna bring you to the table now, I think it's just a good idea to lay out the cards out on the table to all the departments and figure out, this is our constraints. This is what we have to work with.
I agree. I have a question, and I haven't been able to get an answer. As far as the 150, and this is just for clarification for me, the $150,000 appropriation, why is that not a question instead of part of the capital? And that's just, I've had people ask me that. Why wouldn't that be a question to be on the budget referendum rather than part of the capital? You know, should we spend?
Why would we do one line item and not every?
That's because it's part of the budget process. It's part of the, I mean,
It's a budget request.
it's, if
Well,
it was,
and
if it was
that's-
outside
that's
of the
what I mean.
budget cycle, it probably would be, but it's part of the budget cycle, which is the right way to do it, and then they vote, I mean, they're not voting on every line item in the budget.
I think that's a sticky wicket, we gotta talk about it in the library, figure it all out. I think there's a lot of facets to that.
If you allow one department, you have to allow every department. You can end up with 20 questions on there. Should we buy a new truck?
And, right,
Yeah,
we have a capital committee to make the decisions.
How about
Right.
a motorcycle?
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to know. Why would it not be a question rather than part of the capital? Because it's, and again, I don't understand.
the
That's why-
150
Yeah.
for the library, it was part of the capital.
No, I'm saying why, that was my question.
Right.
Why is it part of the capital? Because it is a study, it's not like
And I-
are we gonna build something or
It's
are
not
we
an
gonna-
asset,
Yeah, I mean,
it's working towards a capital asset, but it's
Okay.
not a true asset. But that's a good question, I mean, I can look into that. All right, thanks, Harry.
We would capitalize that as part of the asset.
That's what I
there you go.
was leaning
So that's why I
towards.
started off on capital, okay.
Can I, a couple more? I think as far as the fence in being at 80,000 and why would we need it? I think that there are, if you were gonna close or vacate a building, I think.
Harry, do you think or do you know? If you don't know, then it's a waste of time. Let's find somebody who knows. I'm sorry to interrupt. But if it's just you thinking, that is enough.
That's what, and it may be a state mandate, it may be a town mandate, I don't know. It may be, if you mothball and declare a mothball,
Yeah,
you have to, but I don't understand it from a simpleton point of view.
there's a lot of
I was
things I
just-
think that come up through processes like these that are just unknowns, like the Bobcat at the Huckleberry is a perfect example. We've now been renting for 2 winters that special machine to do a certain plow job, right? You know, can the cost with the capital request of that same machine that we wanna purchase, you know, come out of the new school budget? These are all kinds of like,
We tried
We
that already,
discussed that
it
last
didn't
year.
work. We got
Yep.
stonewalled really hard on that. Because my argument would be, yes, it should be, it's part of
If
the
it's
specialized
repurposed.
construction. And if we didn't have that new school construction, we wouldn't have the need for that piece of equipment. So the project drove that piece of equipment, but we got shut down on that.
well, not to pay out of the
Should
the
come out of the
current,
budget. My,
but if for anything that's left over, if we're gonna purchase it now, you know, which we won't know how much we have remaining until it's done, but.
right, there's underlying things on that right now, because it's not as big as it once was. I think it's $2 million underrun right now, but we haven't tore down the school yet. And when they tear down the school, they're not so sure of the subterranean underneath the school and what that'll cause. And I think we'll be lucky to end up with $1 million savings on that project. And that's as of today, speaking with people. So I've already looked into that a little bit of what's left. All right, let's close out that, please.
Well, did you have any questions on that?
I think our team has got most of that information already, so.
I guess Ryan's presentation would be pretty telling as far as what we can and can't do moving forward based on the debt we're facing now.
Right, can you send that to me? You don't have to speak for, absolutely.
Thanks for putting that together, Ryan. So capital is the last slide that I have. The capital committee did a great job out of the gate. They laid it all out. And then it's been reworked twice since then, but here are the major items we're looking to tackle next year. And of them, the high school track is the largest expense.
But the high school track is getting covered out of what?
$1 million will be bonded and 1.285 will be covered out of revenue.
Yeah. So the bond aspect, the job is only $1 million with the bond.
Well, then we added the
What's
BK 56, I think it is, the $270,000 1996 dump truck into a bond, bringing it to the 1.27.
Did we use it for field reserve last year for the lower field truck replacement?
It's all good, but we'll go over this
Yeah, when we get to
when we get to capital. It's,
Yeah.
The Board of Selectmen cut a lot of the reserves through our deliberations.
See, now, the question on that is you guys cut a lot of reserves. How are we paying for those needs down the road? Because that cutting of that reserve, all that did is say, we don't have the money in this year's budget because we're packed to the max. But hopefully 2029, we have plenty of money in the budget and we can fit it on a hope. And I think we went through this last year, is those reserves are key to not hitting another wall,
And that
not
was-
hitting another hurdle that we can't jump over.
What Ryan and I were talking about in the capital at the end
Yeah,
was you have to fund the reserves.
And Tara agreed
You
with us,
have
she
to
didn't
fund
cut
it.
money up, many of them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing.
If you can't, then you're left with nothing.
You have-
Then you just can't. So you've got to fund
And I
the
hate to
reserve.
see like the vehicle reserve, like fire, so
Yeah.
we cut 50, what's 50,000?
It's
It's just
nothing.
not
It-
worth it, even.
You're
even
right.
that reserve.
Because that doesn't pay for anything.
Right.
What we have is, you have, and if you look at the pockets of money, and I'm gonna go off the top of my head right now, so this is again napkin math. I believe we have 517,000 coming in from FEMA. We'll take 300,000 of that and move it to a reserve for the fuel and a reserve for the health insurance. This is just out of the box thinking. That gives us $210,000. We have $177,000 left over, I believe, from cash non-recurable, and we have another 100-something thousand left over from another bucket. So we have about $530-something thousand to maneuver into the capital. So if you take the refunding the reserves back to the first select woman's budget, not the Board of Selectmen's budget. So if we fund back all the reserves that were taken out by the Board of Selectmen, out of that 535, we can then purchase a couple of those capital items. With the remaining 140, we can go through the list and pay cash up front this year for those capitals. So we can fund the reserves back to the first select limits, which is not the full reserve amount, but it's quite a bit of funding of reserves. 350,000 we can fund reserves with the money that we still have. And I'll lay out my worksheet when we get to this to show you all. But we have 535, or the 517, 300,000 will backstop fuel. The fuel prices, we can look at managing, moving them down from 333 to actual and backstop the reserve. And we can fund the reserves, Brian, and Brianna, which is your concerns. And I think with this pockets of money and the way we can work, the rough napkin number right now is that we're at 4% without too much resistance. And then that will work from there. So I don't want you to get On the reserves, Ryan, I think we have a plan. I'll show you the pockets of money when we get to that part of the meeting that we worked out, that we have still. That's not including the salt savings yet or anything else. We had 2.11 million in extra revenue from this year. That's all being used. Part of that is the 1.22 here
I
that
think
Tara
I
used.
think they used 44,000 of salt savings here.
Yeah, but there's
How
still,
do we account for salt savings when the winter's not over? For the year
When
in
Ralph, in our
2023?
meetings, Ralph said that by March
By
we would
March,
know
we would know.
how much.
By the time, he felt by the time we were in our deliberations, that he would be able to give us a pretty solid feel for it, because I stupidly asked, I was like, so when do we not worry about salting? I was like, I'll say it, I have no problem asking. He was like, March, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's fine.
You never know until you ask.
Well, I didn't know, it was, and then after it came out of my mouth, I was like, yeah, I probably could.
so I think we're good here, is Ryan and Brianna. I think we're good.
Yeah, no, it's good.
And I think we could fund the reserves.
Well, it's just the beginning, we got plenty
Right.
of weeks to talk about it.
I think on the revenue side of things, I think that was pretty straightforward. I don't think there's much there to really discuss.
I think it is pretty straightforward. I can tell you that I can only hear Glenn talking, so.
That's
if you
usual.
have questions,
That's a shock.
oh, it's making for a very boring meeting.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I lo-
But if you have any questions, if you say it into that microphone, that would be best.
So basically,
Oh, that's why.
so, yeah. Basically, Marcia, on the revenue, it's just straight up revenue, and we put in the 250 of the extra revenue, the Dan fund, as I'll call it, from last year.
That's correct. It's still in as 250. I'm a little more concerned because we don't have any storm money out there that we won't, where the 250 might be coming from, but possibly interest income if the rates stay high. Some of the other revenues, when we looked at the charts, when I looked at the charts, it looked like there was an anomaly in 2023. So I didn't include that in my 5-year average. I did the previous 5 years. And then the other one is our collections are so good that we don't have a lot to collect. So we used to be basing our collection rate off of a 5-year average of dollars of collection. And this time I just didn't think that was appropriate because our outstanding taxes are really in half. So I went back and figured what is the percent of the prior year that we were collecting. So instead of basing them off of an absolute dollar amount, it was based off of a percent. And so that's why the back taxes went down. But if you want me to go through the slides, the revenue, the assessments that were right in the ballpark, that our average without a reval is 1.05. Real estate was there, but with the motor vehicles and personal property being up, our total increase was higher this year. So we got a benefit of having a higher tax base on assessments, which is helping us keep the tax rate down. If you flip to the next slide.
Tara, next slide.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right, next slide.
The tax collection rate that, again, if you look at the graph, last year in 2022 was really an anomaly. I think it was still the COVID and the low interest rates and all that were still hitting. So we had a huge collection year, and I just didn't want to use that in the percentage collected. So we're basing it on the prior 5 years, which is 98.94%. Next slide. So here you can see on the right-hand side, the blue chart is the blue line, light blue line on the right-hand side is the outstanding taxes. And they went from, I think, someplace almost 1.1 million down to 600,000. And that's why I didn't think it was appropriate to do it based on a fixed dollar amount. It's based on a percent of the receivable, the average percent of the receivable, which was 52%. Next slide. Supplemental motor vehicles is still based on anything I could find as far as the supply chain and the value of the vehicles. It seems like they're still going to be up. So I did continue to base that on the past 5-year average.
Okay, on the motor vehicles, are we getting traction out of that program that the first selectman put into place, and is that put into this budget? Because I thought we
So-
hired an outside service fund to find motor vehicles that weren't registered in our town, and 50% of that revenue comes to us.
That's correct.
Yep, there's expenditures put in the budget, but I didn't put the revenue into the budget just because we don't know what it will be, and so I don't know that it's actually going to make a blip on these percentages, since they're all estimates anyway. But you'll see in the assessor's budget, the outside, the paid professional services has increased because of that.
So, but it might not make a blip on this number, but it may make a little ding in that 250 of extra revenue that we need, right?
That would be great if we could make a ding in that.
But I mean, it would have to, if anything that comes in is, if it's not, you're not recording it as a revenue, anything that would come in would be part of that bucket, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll go back and see where we are with that. I wasn't sure when the first billing was gonna happen. I thought it was supposed to happen as they went along. So let me get some numbers for that, just so
But
you
I mean,
guys know.
that revenue's got to fall to that 250 that we push out there. Okay, Marcia, go ahead, sorry.
All right, next page. Interest and fees, again, switching from an absolute number to a percentage of the prior receivables based on the last 5 years. And since the collections are low, these track that they'll be lower as well. Next page. The telecommunications tax, we don't get that until we just actually got the letter last week that for the current year that we'll be getting 48,000. I believe it was in the 40s. I forgot the second number. So we don't know, but the telecommunications companies, instead of paying telephone pole by telephone pole in each town, that they pay it in a check in April. And so we won't know that till it comes in. Next page. The intergovernmental revenues are based on the governor's budget. That there'll be 2 more changes before we get to the final numbers. Last year, one of the changes, the appropriations committee, we had in our numbers, but then the final budget was passed after ours. But we made out pretty well that in total our tax, our intergovernmental revenues are just down 30,000 based on the governor's budget. Next page. Land use fees that they're based on the average for just run-of-the-mill fees, 25,000 or under, that we did based on the 5-year average of all the last 5 years of 25,000 or under. Steve started having us keep those statistics on his term, and then we generally add any big fees that we're expecting, and we're not expecting any big fees in the next year. Next slide. Town clerk fees, I took the lower of a 5-year average or what we're projecting for 2023, just because it's slowing down. It was high during COVID, and so I didn't think we wanted to overestimate that. Next, and it wouldn't be material one way or the other. It's not a lot of fees there, other than conveyance taxes. Next page. So during this year, with the interest rates rising, to try and project what our interest was going to be this year, included in that huge amount of excess year-end 23 revenue, I took the general fund and scheduled out in a graph for the last 5 years the cash flow from the general fund of what percent, ups and downs, and it's exactly the same for all 5 years. So I feel pretty confident in that. And then I have taken all the big funds again for this current year, and tried to project them out. And we have more money right now than we're supposed to. So every month, at the end of the month, I say, what is wrong with my projection? And every month it's essentially been the school. The school I projected would be done in December, and of course it's not. And the second big thing that's been wrong with my projection is the radios. We thought we'd make a big payment in January. So I have comfort in the way the projection is working just from using it as a tool this year. I use that same tool for next year using a 4% interest rate on that cash flow analysis. And of course the interest is less next year because we'll have paid for that school and hopefully paid for that radio.
So, Marcia, hold on one second. So, I just want to point out, I don't think there's anything to do in the budget, but this current year with that big spike line item was a windfall for us. It was not in the budget, and it was extra. Now we're putting it in the budget, of $1.3 million of interest this year, which is going to, basically it's one-time revenue. Maybe there's a little bit more next year. But once the school is paid for and rates go down, we're gonna have $1 million+ revenue hole cliff, probably next year. So if there was a way to treat that as one-time revenue against one-time expense, that's the right way to do it. But in this budget, you're right, it's interest income, it's what we're budgeting, it's what's gonna be there. But it's gonna create a problem next year.
So on the budget that, and I think I heard most of that on the budget that you have, that was the department budget, when I was the one that set up some of that.
Yep.
And the capital committee purposely put in $1 million of extra capital to paid for in cash, to be paid for with one-time revenue, and that was that $1 million was being funded by this interest. So exactly what you're saying is one-time revenue, assuming this is one-time revenue to pay for the one-time capital costs, the increase in the capital costs, but then between the first selectman's budget and the selectman's budget, that did get diluted. So yes, there is that risk out there.
That circles back then to control the expenditure line.
Exactly, yep.
You have to control the expenditure line. The revenue line will go where it's going, right? But the control has to be the expenditure line. Because if you match your revenue to expenses to revenue, you're gonna be chasing that because of the one-time revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So the key is control the revenue line.
Great.
So, all right. Go ahead, Marcia.
Next slide. Oh, I'm done.
Yeah, I have a question. From my notes from many years ago, we talked about Iroquois money. Where's the Iroquois money?
Well, they haven't started the next phase of their project yet, so which money are you talking about? Is there money that they owe us from the past or new money?
No,
or-
coming up, we go with, that told the Iroquois price. Steve,
So
go
can I
ahead.
bring you to the
So
tables?
Iroquois told us 2 years ago that they had a mandate to build the additional compression at their site in Brookfield. They needed to have it to meet their contractual obligations in New York City, to have it finished by 2024.
Right.
It was between an 80 and 100 million dollar project.
Yes.
And we were talking about that, that would generate somewhere between 1.9 and 2.3 million in
Correct.
additional taxes.
Yes.
The conversation was also, we wanted them to give us some land abutting Wisconneer, so we could extend the ball fields. And then we were gonna, I was gonna ask them to pay for all the improvements over at the high school on the baseball field and the softball field. Put in light, put the irrigation, do all of those things. Because they're in our community and they're a big taxpayer and we support it.
So where does that
That's-
stand now?
That's where it left when I had.
Is it
So I
still
spoke
viable?
to them 2 weeks ago. They haven't gotten all the environmental permits they need for that next phase, so they said summer is best case scenario in order for them to get the green light to go ahead with the expansion, but
So, Marcia, when would they start? If they started in summer, when would we start seeing revenue?
well, they wouldn't-
It
they
would,
wouldn't put the
and
shovel
again, I'm
down.
sorry, I didn't hear most of that, but we would start seeing revenue prorated as they did the work.
So if they started in, say, October of 2024,
So we wouldn't see revenue, if they started in October 2024, the grand list date is October 1st of 2024, which generates money for the 2026 budget. So then we wouldn't see revenue until 2027. The grand list of 24 starts to be collected July of 25, which is fiscal year 26.
And do we think that we'll get any of these other potential, the groundwork that Steve laid about getting,
Yeah, the help on the Wisconneer and stuff,
the
yeah.
ball field stuff, is any
I
of
would
that
just
still
better
Yeah,
on the
ask
table?
they've also inquired about purchasing the extra parcel of land down at the end of Long Meadow that currently belongs to the town, so
I'm sorry,
we're-
that's correct. They really want that
Yeah,
because they want to block off the road down there and make it all private. We own the land past their plan, so we have a leverage point there.
so I'm currently working with land use and the attorneys to get them the permissions they need to go in and do the surveys to determine if it's something they even want to purchase.
Do they, by any chance, see, like, if you look at the GIS mapping, if you look at any of that land around there, they own like 15 individual parcels. Is there any tax benefit to them for it to not be one big chunk of land? I mean, it's all different. It's not like that they own 50 acres, they own like 10 different 5-acre chunks.
They also own some residential houses now, too.
Yeah, I
so-
used to live in that neighborhood, but, yeah, I used to walk down to that property.
That's a great question, I don't.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's any, if that's a benefit to them to not have it as one parcel, tax-wise, if they're missing, I mean, in some, they have a lot of, but it's not a lot, it's a lot of small pieces of property that are all, adjacent to each other, but I don't know if they were benefiting from it not being one.
Unless the town can use a piece of property for actual open space that people can use and participate, why take it off the tax rolls? It's gotta be of some use to the town. Unless you're saying, we just want open space, we're gonna take it. But you know what? They're not gonna do anything with it anyway. So it's open space.
I get that, but this is a key question from the point of view for planning, planning where we're going. So if we look at the pockets of money that we have ARPA, we have 1.9 million left in ARPA outside of, we're gonna utilize 226,000 in next year's budget. we still have 1.6 that we're planning on using in 2024, 2025. So we still have a pocket of money to push, not this coming budget, the following year's budget down. We also have $1 million in the capital non-reoccurring for that same year. So right now, we still have $2.6 million to push down the debt in 24, 25 in our pockets of money. So not only are we utilizing the pockets of money to bring this year's down, and hopefully we'll get it under 4, we still have another 2.6 remaining to push down the following year's budget to help us. So we planned ahead with that. We actually have another $900,000 right now in these monies things for the future year down the road, 2 years down the road, to help us cover the debt process that we're going through. So we've planned out over 5 years how to help ourselves. This Iroquois money would now be coming in at a point where it's gonna help us at a time where our planned funding and the strategic moves that we've made, that will now come into play down the road of, so I think the decisions we're making now are safe, because that's more than likely gonna go through, and we're gonna replenish back in the time frame where we expend all this money that we've been strategically working with. So it looks like if that does come in, and Brianna brought up a point that if that is the case and you're talking with them and they're gonna pick up some ball field or whatever they're gonna do, it'd be nice, because we don't
That
wanna
changes
spend the money
capital
now
drastically.
for a year if we're gonna have the money coming in from an outside source 2 years down the
Or
road.
if we can think about not, funding a reserve or something, if we know that they're just gonna fix it, then that changes everything.
So I think that part that you're talking Iroquois becomes a process of how do we handle future capital, and how do we handle, like I say, next year's budget that we have some money put away already for. Not thinking in the year, but trying to think 3 years out of how to protect taxpayers from large increases. So I think if you could update us on that in your next talks, or review maybe as a board of selectmen what's the knowledge that Steve has that maybe you weren't privy to, and I don't expect you to be privy to it because this has happened years ago too, that get up to date with what he talked to Iroquois about, so you can carry that.
I'm in full contact with them. I've had walkthroughs and looked at their expansion plans and.
I'm not saying you haven't, what I'm saying is he might have had some things, asks in there, like for the ball fields, that you might not have been aware of.
Yeah, that came up at the coffee with the community on Saturday. People are starting to ask, like, how are these fields gonna be replaced? I'm curious to know if there's been a study done to know that Wiskaneer site is a feasible when the trailers come down. Where is that plan?
That's not in our ballpark, I would have no idea. But these are the things we need to get together to be able to be sustainable and be able to not put the burden on the taxpayers of 8% down the road, and plan ahead, you know.
Part of the tech
If
time,
can
though?
I,
'Cause
if
thought that was
I
part of the
understood
new
that question, there is money in the
in
new school budget
project,
to
but
redo those fields.
Yeah,
Not
it's
money, not
There,
money.
I don't know the dynamics of that, Steve, I can't answer to it, because
I talked to Paul Checo about it, and they had, I think, $90,000
But-
in the actual budget.
I thought maybe Tecton had looked at
Yeah.
that, so it might be worth asking.
I think it just comes down, and I think Dan made a point, and he maybe made, is do we know or do we think?
Right,
Because again, knowing and thinking are two different things. You could assume, and we don't know. And we are trying to get through this with the least amount of burden on our taxpayers. I mean, we're all in agreement to that. So part of that is planning. Part of that is knowing what's ahead of us and planning for it. The unknowns kill you, the knowns you can manage. If you know it, we can manage it. So these are the things. If you have a question about that, we need you to get the answer to it so we can figure out how to fund this. Because we do have planned for this. We've been conservative as a group over the past 4 years, and that's why we do have money for 2024, 2025 to help push down the debt. We do have money in 25, 26 still planned out. So I think these are the things we need to get closer on. And I think when we do the capital presentation with Ryan, he'll show what's there. I think then, and this is my opinion only, so I want that everybody to know, is then it becomes real important for the capital committee to work with the board of selectmen, to work with the stakeholders and really figure this out so we know, hey, everybody's on board, we know exactly what we're gonna do, we have a plan, all plans change, you know, everything's fluid, so things could come up. But we have a general plan, and that would go back to our audit process, and Dan brought it up, is we told our auditors that we have no big capital projects coming our way. That's in our report, that's in our annual report. Part of the rating that we got is, we have big debt now, we acknowledge the new school, we acknowledge we're taking on that big debt. But I believe one of the sentences clearly states that Brookfield has no plans for any large projects in the near future. So if we do have a need for a large project, we have to plan for it, and we have to show them that we can handle it and that we can do it. And then people have asked, well, what's the difference of AAA versus AA? And the numbers I've seen, they're substantial numbers. If we drop a rating, everyone says, well, what does it cost? It's quite a bit of money. It's like, you know, on 20 million, I think I read it's like $500,000 on $20 million. So it's a substantial amount of money that it's important that we keep our rating, keep our financial status, work within the guidelines. So part of, again, our bigger picture is knowing what the field, and that was a good question. I don't have an answer either. But is the fields covered under the school, as you said, or do we have to fund them outside? Do we have to find an outside funding source?
Yeah, funding's one thing, but the plan to actually do the work. Is there a feasibility study for that property associated with the new
I think we
school?
need to look at the Texon plans, because I think that was evaluated
Separate
when
from
the.
finance.
Yeah, but I think that, I was on that committee for the new school project, so
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that Texon had accounted for the actual field to be able to be built there because of the layout of the land, so the engineering, whatever. Harry, what?
While you're looking at that, I think that there's a line item in the school budget for irrigation for fields at the new school, Candlewood Lake.
I think we were talking about when they take the portables down from Wisconsin, there was discussion about putting in a full 90-foot baseball field at Wisconsin.
Right, so the irrigation they're talking about is for up at Wisconsin, not at the, because I think it's listed as at the Candlewood Lake School.
Okay,
But
but it's
it's-
not gonna be baseball fields at Canada.
No, I know, that's why I'm saying,
Okay.
but I think it's listed on there as it's gonna be, that it's for the new school, not Wisconsin.
Would Paul be the right person, NBC?
Yeah.
That's up, maybe outside of the
Yeah.
bus.
Yeah.
All right. Marcia, you're done, right?
Thank you, Marcia.
I'm done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you.
I think you're done with your presentation as well.
Unless anyone has anything else specific?
I don't think from our side there's anything. We have the meeting for tomorrow. It's just like last year, going to the Capitol, basic stuff. Tuesday, we talked about changing the meeting
Diane, I'll let
to
you
the high
know.
school. We're gonna try to get the high school. Diane's gonna follow up on that. I just think it'd be good for all the shareholders one time. So again, you know, when you say, hey, we can't fit it, this is why we can't fit it.
I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. I love it.
So, or we can fit it. It may show us that certain projects can fit, and that would be great too, to open up our eyes to what we can fit. So,
is this as part of the capital committee, Ryan, or was this something you did just on your own?
This is something we did on my, but it's gonna roll in the capital committee because
Great.
the
Yeah.
model can show you as you project out, you can put even a 10-year plan in, you can kind of see where we go up and down, you know, based on our needs.
And
so
that
what-
was-
Thank you.
yeah.
We were gonna do it once we
Exactly.
resumed after the budget
Exactly.
season, that was
So
kind
this
of.
was kind of like, we want to get it done, so,
Yeah,
because we had a lot of large requests in this budget, so we wanted
Yeah.
to get it done to show everyone where we stand, but then it's gonna go into the capital committee, and then we can use that going forward for planning. Because we didn't plan last
Super.
year, this is what we need to do this year.
Great.
All right, any other questions, any other statements? Do we have a motion to adjourn? I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?